Boa tarde a todos. A gente começa.
Good afternoon. We're going to start our G20 wrap-up press conference here in Washington, D.C., with the Minister of Finance from Brazil, Fernando Haddad, Governor of Banco Central do Brasil, Roberto Neto, Brazilian Secretary of International Affairs, Tatiana Rosito, and also the Deputy Governor of Banco Central do Brasil, Paulo Piketty. We're going to move forward with questions because we have only about 30 minutes for the press conference due to the very tight agenda that everybody has. So we'll start with Maria Luisa Capulgo from Bloomberg. Bloomberg News. My question is for the governor of Banco Central do Brasil and also from Paulo Piketty, because we want to find out how we can align the tax cuts and the interest cuts and how we can face the emerging markets with a foreign currency, and also regarding the debt. We have been talking about the fact that, as we have talked before, there is that we understood there was a risk for deflation as it was being shared with the stakeholders. We have been talking about the deflation risk, talking about the components that were at risk here in the United States and also in some advanced economy countries. And we think that there was a repricing of the deflation process, and we have started a phase now where there's a high probability of a higher interest rate for a longer period of time. We understand that the developing world debt has increased a lot, and there was an expense of 24% of the GDP, and it's more than the 10% of the emerging countries and 4% of the low-income country expense. So we understand that this can lead to a very high rollover cost, even though there is a lot of liquidity for the country of worldwide countries, but there could be an effect that could result from this high rollover that could lead to a very high liquidity in emerging countries and low-income countries, which will affect the private credit sector. Within this context, we highlighted the multilateral development bank role to help the capital needs in a coordinated manner, given the situation that was mentioned by Mr. Roberto Campos. Aline Bronzatti from Agência Estado. Good afternoon. I am from Agência Estado, and I would like for the minister and the governor of the central bank to talk about the outlook regarding the drop in Selic. We had a repricing in the market after Mr. Roberto Neto's intervention. So we can see there was a drop of the forwarding guidance. So what is your outlook for the situation? What we have been attempting to do and make it clear for the market that the most transparent you are for monetary policy, more efficient the communication is. So we're trying to be as transparent as possible. And there were times when things were clear. And with that, we can do a forward guidance because we can have a better visibility horizon. And in a certain way, we were foreseeing a problem regarding the global deflation process or a certain hesitation towards inflation process because in the area of services there could be a potential pressure resulting from the labor market. So we decided not to use the forward guidance, not because we thought that the scenario had changed, but because there was a lower visibility. So when I have a forward guidance, I have to look ahead, and that makes the markets to move along with a clearer communication channel. But once there is not a lot of certainty with the guidance and the point of views that we have, this can generate a different cost in the monetary policy. So we try to reduce the visibility period, and that's what we did. And what we try to do also is to take a step-by-step approach to what was happening worldwide. So as we are not really aware of how the pricing will happen because the markets are still settling, we see some possible paths. So we can go back to a normal scenario. Another one is a long-term uncertainty, and another possibility is a higher repricing for the market. And depending what happens, we'll have action and reaction. But I cannot really foresee what's going on because we're going to a pricing process and we have no visibility to what is going to take place. We understand that the market is highly sensitive to any kind of statement of monetary policies that are happening here in the United States. So this is a very long response. But anyway.
Adding to Roberto's answer, I think there was an episode in the last few days which is quite significant, which was not included in the script, if you will, for the communications of Fed. Ever since Marrakesh, we spoke about that the other day, but when the Brazilian inflation rate was disclosed in March, to us, it was like 30 minutes after the U.S. announcements for the Brazil's IPCA, 0.16%, 9 a.m., and the U.S. inflation disclosure from 0.4 at 9:30 in the same morning. And if you take what happened with the market in this half hour, you can understand very well how the market reacted in terms of their mood. So there was a clear signal. There has been many bets. So any reversion of expectation ends up hurting a lot the investors. The market is very much into the theory that at some point during the first half of the year, ever since last year, the cycle of cuts of the Federal Reserve Bank would start. But it was the contrary. Ever since Marrakesh, they had all the reasons for actually having believed in this position, which in fact the signal of the U.S. Monetary Authority was that. They were signaling that. But then when March came with the frightening news, there was a drastic reversion of expectations. And this changed completely the mood, if you will, about how macroeconomic variables would behave throughout the world, in the U.S., in Europe, in Brazil, in emerging countries, and so on. As Roberto said, this is a moment in which these, if you will, tectonic plates are accommodating. We need to be careful where all of this will land. But there has been a real expectation reversion regarding the Fed, and we must understand ourselves, since all of us can imagine the importance of what is the Fed and what it represents in the world, because all the rest ends up depending on it. So it's not a little thing what happened, you know? It wasn't by chance. It's very important what happened, and we need to be cautious and follow the next days and weeks, because there will be a global repositioning of this one episode.
A question by Andrew Shonakov from TES New Agency.
Obrigado. The Brazilian government has proposed to the United Nations International Law Commission that Russian President Vladimir Putin and other leaders receive immunity during their international visits, protecting them from prosecution and legal actions. So my question, have they responded yet? What was their response? And if not, do you still expect President Putin to attend the upcoming summit? Obrigado pela oportunidade.
Infelizmente eu não tenho como te responder.
Unfortunately, I can't answer because I have no information about the topic. I apologize. I won't be able to answer.
A repórter Marcela
Aires from Reuters. Good afternoon. Regarding the environment of expectation changes by cuts to interest by the Federal Reserve. So what is the pressure in the multilateral banks? Have you noticed if there is a shorter time frame that will be necessary for channeling resources to the countries that need them the most?
We have had talks with the ministers, including with the Secretary of Treasury, Yellen, about that ever since last year. A lot of concern about that. In Europe, we did have a de-acceleration, quite reasonable, I would say, particularly in Germany, and France is avoiding to have a stronger fiscal adjustment, which in the case of Germany is constitutional. Germany actually tried to release or loosen the fiscal adjustment, but the international court said they couldn't. In France, it's different. They're having like an internal discussion, which is quite in turmoil right now, because these are the two countries which anchor European Union. So I was speaking to Roberto in that meeting about the expectation of having cuts from the European Central Bank, taking into consideration the communications, the performance of the economy, how the inflation goes on, and the information that are given to the public. And everything indicates that there will be a shift in the pathway in Europe. But in the case of the United States, information aren't aligned, if you will. Those who speak on behalf of the Fed are not completely consistent in their speech currently. So this reinforces a situation that is not the case of Brazil. Brazil is a net creditor in strong currency. We don't have any issues with foreign debt, but the countries which are foreign debtors, they usually have their debt in dollars, which is the majority of African countries, for instance, which have $800 billion in debt, most of it in dollar debt. So following the U.S. interest rate. So if there's no restructuring, and the whole appeal was that for the terms to be shortened for new loans, for renegotiation of debt, including the roundtable rendered accounts on what is going on with the debt of the countries which are in pre-default situation. So all of this is going to have to happen in a more expeditious way, and even resort to or tap into funding sources, like having new use, especially for concessional loans, which have never had the due attention, especially in a moment when interest rates are making the service of the debt something unpayable. So yes, we did discuss this restructuring given the upcoming theme of the indebtedness of the low-income countries.
Shu Takaoka from GG Press is going to ask the next question.
Thank you very much for taking my question. My question is on stronger dollar and what is the conversation among G20 countries on stronger dollars, especially pressure on many countries, not only emerging market but also advanced economies like Japan now suffering stronger dollar, and what is your point on that point? Thank you.
We didn't understand. Stronger what? US dollar. Oh, okay. I guess the question was, what is the effect of the strong dollar? Você quer responder? Again, the dollar is one of the variables, but I think what is more important right now is refers back to the first answer, which is should I do it in English? Because I'm getting confused. Okay, I'll continue in English. So we refer back to the first answer, which is we have a much higher amount of debt with a much higher rate, and now this rate seems to be going on for longer because when you look at what U.S. has done, it's basically repricing the timing of the cuts, and the terminal rate, expected terminal rate in the U.S. is now much higher. So the question is, what is the implication of that for the countries? And again, this has an implication on liquidity, especially for emerging market countries and low-income countries. So that was debated a lot, and that goes back to the point that the multilateral organism now have a different and an extra task, which is to be able to supply funds for these countries that now have more difficult to access funding because the cost of funding has increased. Now, the dollar is a consequence of that. The dollar is a consequence of actually the interest rates in the US being higher for longer. In the case of Brazil, the dollar is floating. So what is relevant for us is the impact of the dollar in our reaction function, in what you do in the central bank. But I think Brazil has a different situation because our external accounts are very strong. We have had, increasing trade balance. Brazil has become an exporter of oil-related products. Our exports of food are hitting all-time high. And so we think the external position of Brazil is differentiated in that aspect. So yes, the strong dollar is always a problem and can generate reaction from the policymakers around the world. But in the case of Brazil, we see the situation as being better.
Próxima pergunta agora.
Next question is from James Spellman from South China Morning Post.
James Spellman. Então,
Kozuki Takami from Nikkei newspaper. Kozuki Takami from the Nikkei newspaper.
I'm Kosuke Takami with Nikkei. My question is about this US dollar again. And some countries, including Japan, are said to plan intervention in the foreign exchange market. So do you think that it is justified at this time? Thank you.
Okay, so if I understood correctly, the question is on intervening in the FX market. So in Brazil, we believe in the principle of separation, which basically states that interest rate is for monetary policy, macroprudential matters or macroprudential rules are for financial stability, and the FX is floating. And the fact that FX is floating serves a good proposite for us because it works as a shock absorber. So we only intervene in the FX market to correct malfunction. We don't intervene in the FX market to go against a change that is structural, that has a fundamental, like the case that, for example, the rate in the US, interest rates in the US has to be higher for longer. And we actually think that if you intervene against something that is structural, what you do is you create distortion in other macroeconomic variables. And again, we believe that the floating FX serves a good proposite because it's a shock absorber. And in the case of Brazil, we have very large reserves. So what happens when the currency depreciates is our situation becomes better naturally because the net debt decreases when the FX depreciates because we have a large reserves in dollar. So that automatically works as a shock absorber. Thank you.
Próximo a perguntar é...
que na crise econômica de 2000.
In the 2008 economic crisis, that the monetary authority didn't have its independence formalized, but there was quite a great economy at the time. The decision of the Brazilian government at the time, which was much deeper than what we have, was the intention to not intervene and leave the market as it was. So it's important to remember that we're talking about the same government, same administration, and this guidance of preserving the reserves, awaiting for a re-stabilization of the market, was a decision taken at the most acute moment, much more than now.
We have to head to vacate the room because there's a next press conference. So we're going to have one last question from Igor Manuskin from RIA News Agency.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Igor Nemushin, RIA News Agency, DC Bureau. I wonder if you have discussed during the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors meeting the G7 plan to use immobilized Russian assets to support Ukraine, and what is the Brazil's position in this regard, taking into account all possible repercussions? Thank you so much.
This was not discussed. We did not talk about this. The ministers and the governors of central bank did not discuss this during the G20. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.